I never thought a simple dinner could change everything. I had always considered myself part of the Parker family. Growing up, I spent countless weekends at Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert's house, helping with chores, listening to family stories, and even offering support whenever I could. I was the good niece, the one who remembered birthdays, helped with their errands, and always tried to keep peace. So when I received an invitation for a family dinner, I thought nothing of it. It was supposedly to celebrate Aunt Linda's small promotion at work, a casual gathering to spend time together. I felt happy, even a little excited to see everyone. When I arrived, I immediately noticed something different. The house smelled the same, freshly baked cookies and coffee, but the atmosphere felt cold, almost stiff. Aunt Linda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Uncle Robert gave me a polite nod, but I could sense a distance that wasn't there before. My cousins waved and welcomed me warmly, but even they seemed a little hesitant, exchanging glances I couldn't quite read. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just me overthinking things. Dinner started like any other, small talk and laughter filling the room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Aunt Linda kept making subtle comments about family legacy and making sure everything is in order. And Uncle Robert chimed in occasionally, his tone unusually sharp. I laughed politely at their jokes, but inside, a small knot of unease was growing. Every whispered comment I caught, every glance that lingered too long, made me feel like I was stepping into a trap I couldn't see. I remembered how I had helped them during tough times, organizing their home after Aunt Linda's minor surgery, helping Uncle Robert with a messy project at work, and even taking care of their pets when they were away. I had always believed family meant trust, support, and care. But the air around the dinner table that night was different. I felt like I was being tested or watched, though I had no idea why. After dessert, Uncle Robert handed me an envelope with a calm, unreadable expression. I hesitated, glancing at Aunt Linda, who looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The room went quiet, and in that silence, I felt my heart race. The weight of the moment pressed on me before I even opened the letter. Something in their demeanor told me this was not just a simple document. It was something that could change everything I thought I knew about my family. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Little did I know that by the end of that night, everything I had believed about loyalty, love, and family would be shattered. I was about to realize just how far they were willing to go to betray me, and that realization would mark the beginning of a journey I could never have imagined. As soon as I stepped into the house, I felt the difference. My cousins ran to greet me with smiles, and Aunt Linda gave me a hug that felt polite but distant. Uncle Robert nodded at me from across the room, his expression unreadable. On the surface, everyone acted friendly, but there was a chill I couldn't ignore. The warmth I had always felt in this home seemed replaced by something sharp, like an invisible wall separating me from the rest of the family. We all gathered around the dinner table, and the conversation started casually. At first, it was the usual chatter, talking about work, small achievements, and weekend plans, but I began to notice subtle comments that didn't sit right. Aunt Linda would drop lines about knowing your place in the family, or making sure everyone remembers their responsibilities, always with a faintly condescending smile. Uncle Robert added remarks about keeping the family legacy intact, glancing at me in a way that made me feel like I didn't belong. I laughed politely at first, trying not to show that the words bothered me, but deep down, a sense of unease was growing. The more they talked, the more I felt like an outsider looking in. My contributions, my loyalty, all the years I had spent helping and supporting them suddenly felt invisible. Cousins whispered under their breath, glancing at each other, and I caught fragments of sentences that hinted at plans and decisions I wasn't included in. Each comment made me more alert, and I started paying attention to everything. How they spoke, how they looked at me, and what they didn't say. Then, during a quiet moment while Aunt Linda was clearing the plates, I overheard something that made my stomach tighten. Uncle Robert, speaking in a low voice to Aunt Linda, said something about making sure Emily doesn't get a thing from the will. I froze, trying to make sense of it, but they didn't notice me standing nearby. My heart sank. I couldn't be sure I had heard it right. Maybe I was imagining things. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that families have their quirks, that maybe it was just a joke or an offhand comment. But deep down, I felt a tightening in my chest, a warning that this dinner was about more than just catching up or celebrating a small milestone. Something hidden was about to surface, something that could change my understanding of this family forever. By the end of the evening, The casual smiles and polite conversation couldn't mask the tension in the air. I left the table feeling uneasy, like I had glimpsed a shadow of the truth, but couldn't yet understand its full shape. That brief overheard comment about the will lingered in my mind, and I knew that the night was far from over. Whatever was coming, it was going to hurt, and it would force me to see my family in a completely new light. After dessert, Uncle Robert stood and cleared his throat, holding a thick envelope in his hand. The room went quiet, and all eyes turned to him. My stomach tightened as I watched him unfold the paper, his expression calm and almost cruel. "I think it's time everyone knows how the family will is divided," he said, his voice cold and steady. I felt a chill run down my spine. He began reading aloud, listing names and the portions of the inheritance. Each name was followed by nods and murmurs of approval from other family members. But when he came to mine, he paused and looked directly at me. "Emily," he said slowly, "you are not included in this will. You don't belong here the way the rest of us do." For a moment, the words didn't register. I blinked, staring at him, my mind scrambling to process what I had just heard. Not included? Not a single thing? All the effort, all the years of care and loyalty, and this was the answer? My chest tightened, and I felt the room tilt around me. Shock and disbelief washed over me, leaving me frozen in my seat. Aunt Linda smiled, a small, cruel curve of her lips, while my cousins exchanged subtle looks, some of them hiding smirks. Uncle Robert continued to speak, his tone like ice, explaining how family loyalty didn't automatically earn anyone a place in the inheritance. I could barely focus on his words. They felt like a blur, each one slicing through the trust one had in them. Every memory of shared birthdays, family dinners, and moments I thought mattered suddenly felt meaningless. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. The polite, distant smiles from earlier now felt mocking. I realized how carefully they had orchestrated this moment, how they had waited until dessert to reveal it, making it clear to everyone present. I had been treated like an outsider all along, and the confirmation stung deeper than I could have imagined. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to argue that I had earned my place, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of betrayal pressed down on me, and a heavy sadness threatened to overwhelm me. Every ounce of trust one had placed in them felt shattered. I wanted to cry, to scream, to run, but I forced myself to stay composed. When the reading ended, I quietly excused myself, my hands trembling as I gathered my things. The walk to the car felt like moving through a fog, every step heavier than the last. Once outside, I leaned against the cool metal, letting out a shaky breath, my mind racing. Humiliation mixed with anger, and I realized something important. This betrayal would not be the end of my story. A small, fierce spark ignited inside me. I knew then that I wouldn't forget what they had done, and I wouldn't let it go unaddressed. That night, I left their house carrying not just the weight of rejection, but the first seed of a plan, one that would show them that loyalty and heart could not be so easily dismissed. When I finally got home, I locked the door behind me and sank onto the couch, unable to stop the tears. The betrayal of the night hit me all at once. Every memory of helping Aunt Linda with her garden, staying late to assist Uncle Robert with his paperwork, or celebrating family milestones felt like it had been taken for granted. I had given so much, expecting nothing but love in return, and now I was left with nothing, just the sharp sting of rejection. I replayed the evening over and over in my mind. Every smile, every polite word, every casual comment. It all felt like part of a performance designed to make me feel included while secretly reminding me I didn't belong. I couldn't understand how people I had trusted so deeply could be so cold and calculating. Why had they chosen this moment to humiliate me? Why had they made me feel like an outsider in my own family? The questions circled endlessly, and I realized this betrayal was personal, targeted, and deliberate. Even through the tears, I felt a spark of clarity. I knew that reacting with anger right now would only give them satisfaction. I couldn't let my emotions control me. Instead, I decided to let the pain sharpen my mind. I would take time to think, to watch, and to plan. I wouldn't confront them blindly. I needed a strategy, a way to turn the tables in a way that they wouldn't see coming. My loyalty and trust had been used against me, but I could still use my intelligence and patience to regain control. As I thought more clearly, my mind turned to Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert. Aunt Linda's arrogance and need to feel superior were always obvious, even in small matters. She thrived on attention and praise, and she had a tendency to underestimate anyone she thought was weaker. Uncle Robert, on the other hand, was meticulous and prideful, always confident in his control and judgment, but he often overlooked details when he was sure of himself. Those traits, once annoyances, now seemed like tools I could use. Their overconfidence, their need to dominate, and their belief that no one could outsmart them were weaknesses I could exploit. I sat there in silence, letting the plan form in my mind. I knew I couldn't rush, but I also knew I couldn't ignore what had been done to me. The anger and hurt I felt were no longer just pain, they were fuel. Every memory of loyalty and every pang of rejection would guide my next steps. I didn't know exactly what the outcome would be yet, but one thing was certain. I wouldn't let this betrayal define me. I would take control, and I would make sure that the people who had wronged me never underestimated me again. By the end of the night, my tears had dried, and the knot of anger in my chest had settled into determination. I wasn't powerless anymore. I might have been cast aside in their eyes, but I still had my mind, my resolve, and the drive to prove that loyalty and heart were stronger than cruelty. And with that thought, I began to plan. After that night, I knew I couldn't face Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert blindly. I needed to understand what I was up against. Quietly, I began paying attention to everything I could learn about them. I remembered small things they had said over the years, hints about money, business deals, and family disagreements that they had tried to hide. Piece by piece, I started putting together a clearer picture of their world, a world that wasn't as perfect as they pretended it to be. I reached out to a few family friends I still trusted, people who had known me since I was a child, who had seen how loyal and caring I had been. I spoke carefully, asking questions that seemed casual but were meant to uncover details. Slowly, I began to learn about financial mismanagement, assets that weren't openly discussed, and long-standing grudges within the family that had been buried under polite conversation. Each piece of information gave me a better sense of the cracks in their carefully constructed image. I also contacted a few former employees who had worked for Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda. They were hesitant at first, wary of speaking, but I approached them with patience and respect. In their stories, I found inconsistencies in the way the family handled business, hints of greed, and moments when they had made mistakes they didn't want anyone to know. I listened more than I spoke, letting the information build like puzzle pieces in my mind. Every secret I uncovered made me more confident that I could turn things around. I didn't rush anything. I spent hours thinking about what I was learning, connecting dots and noting opportunities. I realized that revenge wouldn't work if it was impulsive or obvious. It needed to be careful, precise, and unexpected. My hurt had grown into a quiet determination, and I could feel a plan forming in my mind, one that would use their weaknesses against them without them realizing it. With each conversation and every scrap of information, I started to see how far their arrogance and need for control could be used to my advantage. Aunt Linda's tendency to boast about her accomplishments, Uncle Robert's pride in his careful image, and their shared desire to appear flawless. All of it became part of the strategy forming in my mind. I was no longer just the hurt niece. I was someone who could observe, learn, and act at the right time. The more I uncovered, the more a sense of purpose replaced the pain I had felt. I knew this would take time, patience, and intelligence. It wouldn't be easy, and I would have to be careful not to let them suspect what I was planning. But I also knew that if I played my cards right, the family that had cast me aside would not see what was coming until it was too late. And with that thought, the spark of my comeback began to grow into a steady, burning determination. I started putting my plan into motion carefully, testing the waters with small, subtle actions. I would mention things in passing to family friends or former employees, small hints about mistakes or inconsistencies in Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert's stories. Nothing obvious, nothing that could be traced directly back to me, but enough to make people start questioning what they had always believed about the family. It was quiet, almost invisible revenge, but it gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in weeks. At family gatherings, I kept up a friendly, polite demeanor. I smiled, laughed at jokes, and acted like nothing had changed. The family, particularly Aunt Linda, seemed to take comfort in thinking I was harmless, that I was still the same loyal niece who would never challenge them. But under that surface, I was watching everything, the way they handled business discussions, the way they boasted about successes, and the small slips they made when they thought no one was paying attention. One evening, during a casual chat with Uncle Robert about a minor property matter, I carefully asked a few pointed questions. At first, he brushed them off confidently, but over the next few days, I noticed him becoming more guarded and uneasy when certain topics came up. Aunt Linda, too, started showing cracks in her usual composure. I could see the subtle tension growing in her expressions, the slight hesitation before she spoke, the way she glanced at me as if unsure what I knew. I found satisfaction in these small wins. They were minor, almost unnoticeable to anyone else, but to me, they were proof that my observations and patience were working. Every inconsistency I highlighted or question I raised caused a ripple in the family's carefully maintained control. They underestimated me, and that was exactly what I wanted. Even as I played my part, acting cheerful and harmless, I was gathering more information. Each small act of subtle revenge revealed more about their weaknesses, their fears, and the gaps in their overconfidence. I began to understand how easily their pride could be manipulated, how their need to appear flawless made them vulnerable. The tension in the house became almost palpable. Aunt Linda seemed to second-guess herself more often, while Uncle Robert's rigid demeanor occasionally faltered. I kept my own emotions hidden, careful not to give anything away, and quietly watched as the seeds of doubt began to grow in their minds. With each success, my confidence grew. I was no longer the hurt, rejected niece. I was becoming someone they underestimated at their own peril. The plan I had been forming in my mind was taking shape, and these small victories proved that patience, intelligence, and careful observation could give me the power I needed. And in that quiet, unassuming way, I began setting the stage for the bigger moves that would eventually turn the tables completely. I finally decided it was time to confront Jason, my closest cousin. We met at a quiet cafe, away from the family's watchful eyes. I looked at him carefully, trying to read his expression. "Jason," I said, "I need to know where your loyalty really lies, toward the family or toward me?" He shifted uncomfortably, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. For years, I had trusted him, shared my worries, and helped him whenever I could. I needed to know if any of that mattered to him now. As I spoke, memories came flooding back. I remembered the countless times I had stayed up late helping Aunt Linda when she was struggling with her health. I had driven across town multiple times to assist Uncle Robert when his business was on the verge of collapsing. I remembered sitting through long, boring family meetings, quietly offering my advice and support, always putting their needs above my own. And now, after everything, I felt the weight of their betrayal crushing me. Jason finally looked me in the eye and admitted he had been torn. He cared about me, but he had also been afraid of upsetting Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert. I could understand his fear, but I also felt the sting of disappointment. It was painful to see how far their influence reached, even into the people I trusted most. After our conversation, I began planting seeds of doubt in small ways. I started mentioning subtle observations about the family to relatives and family acquaintances, letting them hear hints of things that didn't quite add up. I asked casual questions that made people pause and think, even if they didn't know why. Little by little, the cracks in the family's image started to show. People began whispering and exchanging looks when I spoke, and I could see the unease growing. It wasn't easy. I had to maintain the appearance of being polite and harmless, acting as if nothing had changed. But beneath that surface, I was carefully guiding the narrative, making others question the perfection the family projected. Every conversation, every casual remark, was a step toward revealing the truth about Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert. The more I reflected on my sacrifices and the way I had been treated, the stronger my resolve became. I realized that the betrayal was not just personal, it was a pattern. The family had always valued appearances and control over genuine loyalty. But now, with patience and careful action, I could begin to turn the tables. By the time I left that day, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. The betrayal was still painful, but it had given me clarity. I understood who could be trusted, who could be influenced, and how to use the information I had gathered to create tension within the family. My plan was no longer just about revenge. It was about exposing the truth, showing that the loyalty and care I had given were real, and making them face the consequences of their cruelty. By this point, I had gathered enough information to start moving strategically. I knew about the family's hidden mistakes, the mismanaged accounts, and the small lies they had told to maintain a perfect image. I realized these weaknesses could be used to my advantage, but I had to act carefully and plan every step. Rushing in would only make them suspicious, so I focused on being precise and patient. The first thing I did was consult a lawyer, someone I trusted completely. I shared the details I had learned about financial mismanagement and inconsistencies in the will. The lawyer explained that there were technical loopholes and areas that could be challenged, especially if any fraud or misrepresentation could be proven. This gave me a sense of control. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had real power. I could use the law to ensure that their attempt to exclude me wouldn't go unchallenged. While the legal path was being prepared, I began working on the social aspect of my plan. I carefully started planting small hints among family friends and peers who had influence in their circles. I didn't attack them directly. I simply asked pointed questions, shared observations, and let the truth leak in subtle ways. People began noticing inconsistencies in Aunt Linda's stories and Uncle Robert's decisions. Their once solid reputation started to show cracks, though they had no idea I was behind it. I made sure to maintain a friendly and polite front whenever I was around them. I laughed, complimented them, and acted as if I was still the devoted niece who accepted my place in the family. That made it easy for them to underestimate me, unaware that I was quietly gathering evidence, building alliances, and positioning myself to reclaim power. Their arrogance worked in my favor, as they assumed I was powerless and harmless. Every move I made was calculated. I timed conversations carefully, deciding who to approach and when. I began keeping detailed notes of what I discovered and how people reacted. Even small gestures, like casually mentioning a minor detail about a business deal or asking about past transactions, planted seeds of doubt among their peers. Slowly, the family's control over their image began to weaken. Despite all this, I never let myself feel smug. I knew one mistake could ruin everything. Patience became my ally, and every observation, every subtle act of influence, brought me closer to my goal. I was no longer the hurt niece who had been cast aside. I had become someone strategic, intelligent, and determined, quietly taking steps to ensure that when the time came, the family who had betrayed me would face the consequences of their arrogance and cruelty. By the end of this phase, I felt confident and focused. The plan was set, the pieces were in place, and the family remained unaware that I was no longer powerless. Every secret I had learned and every careful move I had made was leading toward the moment when the full truth would finally come to light, and when I would finally reclaim what they had tried to take from me. The moment I had been preparing for finally arrived. The family gathered for a formal meeting that Aunt Linda had called, believing it was just another chance for her and Uncle Robert to show control and authority. They didn't know that I had planned every detail of this moment. I stayed calm, listening as they spoke confidently, unaware that their carefully built image was about to crack. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up slowly and looked around the room. My hands were steady, even though my heart was pounding. I began by calmly laying out the facts, documents, records, and written proof that showed clear mistakes in their financial dealings. I didn't raise my voice or accuse them emotionally. I simply presented the truth, one piece at a time, letting the evidence speak for itself. The room fell silent. Faces that once looked proud and smug now showed confusion and shock. Aunt Linda's confident expression faded as she struggled to respond, her words coming out weak and uncertain. Uncle Robert tried to interrupt, but the evidence was too clear. Every lie, every hidden move, every dishonest decision was exposed right in front of the people whose respect they valued the most. Whispers filled the room as others began to understand what had been happening behind the scenes. I could see the embarrassment on Aunt Linda's face, the way her posture collapsed under the weight of the truth. Uncle Robert avoided eye contact, his arrogance stripped away. For the first time, they looked powerless. I felt something shift inside me, not pride but relief. I wasn't there to destroy them. I was there to stand up for myself and reclaim my dignity. I spoke clearly and calmly, explaining how deeply their actions had hurt me and how unfairly I had been treated. I didn't beg and I didn't attack. I simply made it known that I deserved honesty and respect, just like anyone else. The reaction from others was immediate. Some looked ashamed for staying silent for so long, while others expressed quiet support. In that moment, I realized I didn't need money to feel validated. Respect mattered more. I had proven that I wasn't weak or disposable, no matter how hard they had tried to make me feel that way. As the meeting ended, I walked away with my head held high. Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert were left facing the consequences of their own actions, exposed by their greed and arrogance. I hadn't screamed or sought revenge through destruction. I had chosen justice and self-respect instead. That day marked the end of their control over my life. I didn't walk away rich, but I walked away strong, respected, and free. And that, I realized, was the most powerful outcome of all. After everything that had happened, I finally had a quiet moment to think about the journey I had been through. The betrayal had cut deep, leaving scars I knew would take time to heal. But as I reflected, I realized that the pain had also made me stronger. I had learned to trust my instincts, to be patient, and to use my intelligence to navigate difficult situations. I was no longer the naive niece who believed loyalty alone could protect her. I had grown wiser, more aware of the people around me, and more confident in my own abilities. I decided it was time to focus on myself. The inheritance and family approval no longer mattered. What mattered was building a life that I could be proud of, one that reflected my own efforts and values. I started pouring my energy into my career, taking on projects that challenged me and helped me grow. I surrounded myself with people who supported me, who treated me with respect and care, my chosen family. It was liberating to know that I didn't need anyone's approval to feel worthy or accomplished. One afternoon, I visited a small park that held memories of my childhood. It was a quiet place with tall trees and a small pond, where I had spent hours with my cousins and family on sunny afternoons. Walking there now, I felt a mix of nostalgia and peace. The memories were still there, but the hurt no longer controlled me. I could remember the good times without being weighed down by the betrayal. For the first time, I felt a sense of closure. I could acknowledge the past, learn from it, and still move forward without bitterness. Sitting on a bench, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves, I realized that the greatest power I had gained was not through revenge or exposure. It was through reclaiming my own life. I had proved to myself that I was capable, strong, and worthy, without needing anyone else to validate me. The family's actions had tested me, but they had also revealed the depths of my own resilience. I smiled to myself, feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. The anger and hurt that had driven me before had settled into clarity and purpose. I had learned that justice doesn't always come from taking back what was lost. Sometimes it comes from rising above, living well, and proving your worth quietly but undeniably. As I left the park that day, I carried a calm certainty in my heart. Life was mine to build, shaped by my choices and my strength. And I knew, without a doubt, that the best revenge of all is simply to live well, to be happy, and to thrive, without needing anyone else's approval or validation.